You had mentioned earlier a shift, a generational shift, the shift of Americans who experienced World War II, fought in the wars, had a different sense of history, and now we have this generational shift where some are concerned of an extremely weakening of support among the American public for Israel. Is that reflected also in the more modern presidents, the ones who, again, are post-World War II presidents? Is there a connection there?
I do think, as I was saying, that there's something biographical in the stories of people like John F. Kennedy, and by the way, his successor, Lyndon Johnson, who I think, because he wasn't as cool and hip and eloquent as Kennedy, and because he got entangled in the Vietnam War, wasn't as much beloved by the Jews, but in many ways was far more important, because he, in 1967, makes sure that Israel doesn't go under. He, in 1967, when the French stop supporting Israel with offensive arms, steps in and really gives the American-Israel relationship a push to a whole other level. And he had a great line. He said that you have lost a very great friend, when he's talking about John F. Kennedy's assassination to the Jewish people, but you have found an even better one. And that was Lyndon Johnson. He also had seen Holocaust refugees. He had just enough experience in the war to know how awful the Nazis were. And so I think that was very, very important. So look, when I look ahead to the future, and certainly I look at some of the more recent presidents, I look at the fact that Barack Obama, for example, while I would never call him anti-Israel, and I think calling him anti-Israel was silly and unnecessary. I mean, I really know, having served on in university for so many years, what anti-Israel looks like. We see every day in Israel, unfortunately, and we just have 4 new terrorist victims, what anti-Israel looks like. He wasn't anti-Israel. And in fact, he also signed a major defense pact with Israel. And when he arrived in Israel, made a pilgrimage to Zionist sites and showed his appreciation for Herzl and Ben Gurion and the meaning of Israel and the existence of Israel. Nevertheless, when we look at the Iran deal of 2015, when we look at some of his tone, the tone of some of the statements, when we look at the toxic relationship between him and Bibi Netanyahu, we get a sense that he doesn't have that same instinctive love. And he didn't have that same, what we, in Yiddish call kishka feeling. And that's the fear. The fear is that there won't be that same kind of deep instinctive bond. And there's also another problem, which is that increasingly, as America becomes more polarized, and as bipartisanship is no longer a value, something like the AIPAC organization, which lived off of bipartisanship and said, look, we think bipartisanship is a value, and the fact that Israel is a bipartisan value is actually a gift, not just to the American people, to Israel, but a gift of Israel to the American people, because we need some issues on which left and right can agree. But now, when partisanship is so toxic, we see a situation, and I beg my Republican friends, don't make Israel a wedge issue. Don't make it your property. And I beg my Democratic friends, clean house. Once upon a time, if there was a small group of anti-Zionists in America, they lived in the Republican Party. But today, the growing group of anti-Zionists is in the Democratic Party. And we need people like Barack Obama to clean house and say, and Bill Clinton, say, this is not the Democratic Party we know. This is not the liberalism we know. Because when we look at the Middle East, whatever criticism we might have of what Israel does, when we see what Israel is, the only democracy in the Middle East, the only democracy which has never known a day of peace, the only democracy which has 20% non-Jews, Arabs having full rights, we need to support that. And we can't allow this moral ambiguity where we say, oh, cycles of violence, there's deaths on both sides. Yesterday, there were deaths on both sides, but 2 of them were Palestinian terrorists who shot 4 innocents, including a 16-year-old. There's no moral equivalence there. It's not about body count. It's about counting as standing up and counting for what's important for our moral core, both as Americans and as Jews.